Hello, happy Tuesday. I hope you guys have had a great day. It's dreary here in Dixon, Tennessee, wherever you are joining us from. I hope you're getting some sunshine, and hopefully we'll get that tomorrow. So, welcome February. And February is National Awareness for Heart Disease. So, if you didn't know, heart disease is one of the biggest killers of Americans. And I just submitted a grant I don't know, a couple weeks ago, and I had to look at the largest causes of death in Dixon County and then the 6 surrounding counties around Dixon. And cardiovascular disease was either number 1 or number 2 in each of these. So February is a big month, and I wanted to start off with talking about a study that talks and speaks to the causes of heart disease, because we have all of these new advances, and we could all debate if they're truly advances or not advances to help prevent and reverse heart disease. But despite that, we haven't really seen a reduction in mortality, specifically in women. We've seen a little bit of mortality in men, so reduction in deaths. We're not seeing reduction in prevalence. So we're seeing the prevalence of heart disease grow, that the deaths are either staying about the same in women or they're reducing some in men. And this study specifically is looking at what is the driver, what is the cause of this? Because in traditional medicine, you go to your traditional doctor, you go to your traditional cardiologist, they're probably going to be looking predominantly at blood pressure and cholesterol. Well, are those the markers that we need to be looking at? And that is exactly what this study looked at. So the name of the study is Association of Lipid, Inflammatory, and Metabolic Biomarkers with Age at Onset for Incidence Coronary Heart Disease in Women. And it was originally published, I believe, in JAMA in 2021. It was republished in Biomed Central Medicine in November 2022. And that's the link that I gave you in the show notes, because you can see full access. And that's where I got it from, where I can love and read through and understand it myself. Now, there was this great study that was before this one. It was the Women's Health Study. And what was so great is that it was a huge cohort or a huge volume of women, and the length of time that the study went on. So they enrolled women from 1993 to 1996, and they followed these women until 2004. So almost a decade of following women and looking at health outcomes. And they did a whole bunch of different tests and specific things. What this study did is it went back and looked at the data that they collected retrospectively to find correlations or connections with heart disease. So the original study, and I'm trying something new. I've got another monitor over here with my notes. So if you see me keeping looking that way, it's because I'm looking at my notes, but I'm going to try to come back to you every time. So originally there were 39,876 women age 45 or older in this Women Health Initiative study. That is a lot of women to be studied. And like I said, 1993 to 1996. Now, in the original study, one of the things they were looking at for heart disease is they randomized women into 2 groups, a study group and a placebo group. They gave them aspirin, vitamin E, and beta carotene, and they were looking to see if that had an effect on cardiovascular disease and cancer. Well, that didn't pan out. It did not prove to be a helpful intervention. But what we can do afterwards is take all that data and look at other things. And that's what this study did. And yes, I'm kind of excited about it because it is pretty awesome. So what they did is they looked at the ladies in the study, and they divided them into 4 groups based on age. There were those that were enrolled that were below the age of 55, those between the age of 55 and 65, then between 65 and 75, and then the women above age 75. And what they did is they looked at their baseline markers to see if there was cardiovascular disease already there. If there was, they removed those from the study. And then they followed them throughout the course of the study to see when they developed cardiovascular disease or coronary artery disease. That could be their first heart attack. It could be that they needed to have the artery opened up from an embolus that is in there. It could also be that they needed a bypass, or a cabbage, as some people call it, but they're bypassing those arteries. And then it could also be death, which is not a cool thing to have happen. But if they died from their first heart event, that was when they marked and looked at the markers that they had. So at baseline, they had 28,365 participants that gave blood samples. So they excluded people immediately that they did not have blood markers on to look at. They excluded another 321 because they already had cardiovascular disease. So the women that they looked at was a total of 28,024 women. Still, huge cohort of women, big amount that they're looking at. And they looked at 50 different biomarkers or 50 different things that were present and tried to correlate it to cardiovascular disease. So when they're at baseline, just a couple of things that they looked at for risk factors. They looked at their education level, their level of physical activity. Did they smoke? Did they drink alcohol? Had a parent had a heart attack before the age of 60? Their height, their weight, their blood pressure, their hormone status, like were they menopausal, not menopausal? Did they use hormone therapy? Did they use antihypertensive things? Their body mass index, and their level of physical activity. That was all in there. And then the blood work that they did, I was actually pretty impressed by the amount of blood work that they looked at. They looked at ApoB proteins, lipids, triglycerides, HDL, LDL, all those kind of things, different inflammatory markers, including something called fibrinogen, C-reactive protein, which we commonly do here in the clinic, kidney functions, hemoglobin A1C, homocysteine, 50 of them all there together. So a big cohort looking at a lot of data to try to correlate to find reasons for cardiovascular disease. So before we get into what they found, we need to talk about something called a hazard ratio. So what is a hazard ratio? This is commonly used in research, but for you, it's basically how you can know if something has a high likelihood of being related or a low likelihood of being related to whatever it is they're correlating it to. So how you find a hazard ratio is you divide the rate of how many people got it by the rate of how many people didn't get it, or intervention group versus the control group. But in this one, it's the rate of how many people got cardiovascular disease versus the people that didn't and who had these different biomarkers that's in there. So of these 28,000 plus ladies, age 45 and up, they, at the end of the study, 26,476 had not developed cardiovascular disease. So 94.5% of these women studied did not have cardiovascular disease. Another 5.5% did have cardiovascular disease. So they're comparing those two groups and then looking at the biomarkers to see if they were there. So that left a total of 1,548 participants that did develop cardiovascular disease. That number is actually pretty big in and of itself. To have a study that enrolls just that many people is pretty significant. So the fact that they looked at a huge population and then that many had it, it lets you know that this is going to give us pretty good indicators of what can be leading to cardiovascular disease. So back to the hazard ratio thing. How do you know what number means it's clinically significant? For it to even be having a likely association, just a possibility of association, you have to have a hazard ratio of 1. So anything 1 or above is considered significant and most likely to be correlating together. The higher the number goes, the more likely it is that it's associated. Let's compare this to cancer, lung cancer specifically, that has to do with smoking. So in individuals that smoke, there's a hazard ratio of between 20 and 29 on their number scale, so way above 1 with developing lung cancer. And it's 20 to 29 because it's dependent on how much you smoked, like how many packs per day and how long you smoked for. And the more years you smoked and the more packs you smoked, the higher your hazard ratio is. So I hope that makes sense, is that the higher the number and something we know that is linked, that's how we know it's linked, because the hazard ratio is so high. So in this study, looking at the over 1,000 women who developed cardiovascular disease, what do you think they found as being the number one markers, the drivers of cardiovascular disease, those that had the most connection? Number 1 was diabetes. Its hazard ratio was 10.71. Across the board, that was the highest hazard ratio that they found connecting women with having cardiovascular disease. The next one was metabolic syndrome, which metabolic syndrome is the precursor or the step before you get to diabetes. That's when you have hyperinsulinemia or too much insulin. You're becoming insulin resistant, as a lot of people like to call it. Usually develop high blood pressure. You get a high waist to height ratio. Usually fatty liver is in part of metabolic syndrome, but metabolic syndrome had a hazard ratio of 6.09. So a little less than full-blown diabetes, but still very significant because it's above 1. Hypertension, which is part of metabolic syndrome, has a hazard ratio of 4.58. So significant. They're saying, yes, we're thinking so far diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and hypertension, which are all related together, lead to a higher rate or a higher correlation of cardiovascular disease. And if you need to understand that connection, go back and look at the study that I did. And I talked about the study that I pulled together, the case study I did for the certification course that I just finished in December, but it's relating cardiovascular disease back to hypertension. And then I did one before that talking about the connections and how hypertension is related to hyperinsulinemia. So it's all connected. You can go back and look at the other ones. So we have so far diabetes, metabolic syndrome, hypertension. Number 4 was obesity, which is often a precursor to hypertension, which is often the precursor to metabolic syndrome and diabetes. So you see, we're just kind of moving down the road for things there. So obesity's hazard ratio was 4.33. So just being overweight gave you a higher risk for cardiovascular disease. Next, number 5 was triglycerides. So that is part of the lipid panel. It's just not one that most doctors talk that much about. And why don't they talk much about it? Because there's not really a great drug to treat it. The only thing that really treats triglycerides is nutritional intervention and exercise, which is hard for doctors to kind of push through. But its hazard ratio was 2.14. So we're getting less and less as we move down. Oddly enough, elevated triglycerides are often seen before hypertension kicks in. And I may have kept smoking. Smoking may have been number 5. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, smoking was 3.92, which that was number 5, making triglycerides number 6. Now, if you had a parent that died of a heart event before the age of 60, that increased it by somewhere between 1 and 2. And I don't know why they listed a range there other than maybe the age of the parent or whatnot. Then we get into lesser. So when they reported the results of this study, they're like, we found a strong correlation between diabetes, metabolic syndrome, hypertension, obesity, smoking. These are the ones that we see, yes, is the main drivers, main clinically significant correlations with cardiovascular disease. But still significant, but to a lesser extent, are cholesterol panels. So total cholesterol had a hazard ratio of 1.67. So only 0.67 elevated and correlating with cardiovascular disease. Your LDL only has 1.38. The thing that's usually called the bad cholesterol and that everybody thinks is the driver of cardiovascular disease, it has one of the lowest hazard ratios in their panel at 1.38, barely being significant for cardiovascular disease. There's this newcomer to the cholesterol world. People are talking about ApoB and saying ApoB has a higher correlation with cardiovascular disease. Well, ApoB's hazard ratio is only 1.89, which is more than LDL. I will give it that. It's actually more than total cholesterol, but it's nowhere near the 10.71 hazard ratio of diabetes or that of metabolic syndrome, which is 6.09, or even hypertension, which is 4.58. They did find in the study that if you lived to an older age and developed all of these things at a lower age, your risk was attenuated, meaning it was a lower risk. So if you make it to 75 and then you develop diabetes, it's not as big of a risk of developing a cardiovascular event as if you develop diabetes at the age of 55. So the main point there is stay healthy as long as you possibly can. Push it off because that makes it much less likely for you to get heart disease. But what I love about this study and what it brings home to me especially is we're barking up the wrong tree in medicine, people. And I need everyone who's hearing my voice to kind of wake up to this. It is not just about the cholesterol. In fact, there's bigger markers being diabetes, hyperinsulinemia, prediabetes, the hypertension. These are the big things that we should be going after before we even talk about cholesterol. And if you walk into a doctor's office and you have a perfectly great cholesterol, you might want to question, do I need to take that medicine, or is there other markers that I should be looking at to know if I'm at high risk? And just because my LDL is at 140 doesn't mean I should run and jump and take cholesterol medicine, especially if my other risks are different. Now, this is not medical advice. I am not telling you to stop your cholesterol medicine. I am saying educate yourself, educate your doctor with studies like this, and make informed decisions that are going to help you be as healthy as you possibly can. All right. I hope that was helpful. Share it with a friend. Share with a friend who needs to know how to not have a heart attack. Big thanks to Dr. Kim Berry for showing me this article and bringing my attention to it. He has a great YouTube video that is way more elegant than I just came out with, all kinds of pretty graphs and things like that. Just search under his YouTube channel for How Not to Die of a Heart Attack, but it's on the same study. Look at the study yourself, see what you think. Yeah, but I think it's a pretty cool one. And we're going to continue some heart talk the rest of this month in a different way next week. Next week, I'm really excited about, so stay tuned for that one. I'm going to have a special guest. Couple of things coming up for the clinic. We have Nourished, which is a ladies event, more spiritual related, coming up on March the 8th. You can get your tickets now. You have to purchase tickets by February the 20th because I have to have a head count for food. So you can find the link for that in the show notes. Please buy your tickets. Bring a friend. It's $45 a full day of the event with your meal included. The Low Carb for Better Health site is up and running. It has got all of our speakers on there. It's got lots of good information about what the event is going to be like this year, but it's February 12th and 13th. Check that out at lc4bh.com. That's LC, the number 4bh.com. Use the code EARLY for 15% off through the end of February. So come March 1st, if you haven't got your low carb ticket, the ticket price will go up. So you've got a month to go get those. And then lastly, another cool thing that we're doing here at the clinic, and I hope you share it with anybody that is in this area that needs information about health, but we're going to start doing free health screenings here at the clinic. We're going to do biometric scale readings, or if you've ever been in here, you're going to get a fancy weight. You'll get a blood pressure and a blood sugar, and these are just free, open to anyone in the community. Our first one is going to be on February 18th. It's going to start at 10:30, and we're going to go from 10:30 to 2, and however many people we can fit in to screen, the better. But I will have a dedicated nurse here to help with those screenings and to kind of tell you what those readings mean, and then send you with a paper so you can talk with them with your healthcare provider. So that is February 18th. If you know someone in the Dixon or surrounding area who could use some screening, send them our way. We would love to get more information in people's hands so that they can be informed to make good health decisions. All right, so that was Nourished. Check out the link for your tickets. Low Carb for Better Health. Go to the website. You can purchase tickets and lodging there. And then February 18th, mark your calendars. And until then, focus on the big things that can prevent heart attacks for you. If you have diabetes, get your sugar under control, get it out of there. If you've got metabolic syndrome, get it under control. If you got high blood pressure, get it under control. And it's not just about taking a medicine, it's about fixing the underlying pathology that's going on, which is too much insulin and a poor diet that is driving that insulin and that inflammation. All right, until next time, stay happy and stay healthy, and join me next week.